Imagine if you had £10 million in your bank account. That's more than enough to buy a luxury mansion, a private jet, and a yacht. But what if you had even more? What if you had hundreds of millions, or even billions of pounds? You might think that's impossible, but there are actually 171 people in the UK who have at least £1 billion in their personal wealth. They are the members of the Sunday Times Rich List, and together they own a staggering £597 billion. That's more than the GDP of Sweden, or the combined wealth of the bottom 60% of the UK population. But how much tax do these super-rich pay on their enormous fortunes? The answer is not much. Most of their wealth is in the form of assets, such as property, shares, art, and jewelry. These assets are not taxed unless they are sold or inherited, and even then there are many loopholes and exemptions that allow the rich to avoid paying their fair share. That's why some economists and campaigners have proposed a radical idea. A 2% tax on assets above £10 million held by all members of the Sunday Times Rich List. This would mean that anyone with more than £10 million in assets would have to pay 2% of their excess wealth every year to the government. For example, someone with £20 million in assets would pay 2% of £10 million, which is £200. Someone with £100 million in assets would pay 2% of £90 million, which is £1.8 million. According to analysis by Tax Justice UK, the Economic Change Unit and the New Economics Foundation, NEF, this 2% tax could raise as much as £22 billion per year. That's enough to fund public services and offset inequality in the UK. For instance, £22 billion could pay for the annual salaries of 600,000 nurses or 400,000 teachers, the annual cost of free school meals for all children in England, the annual cost of providing social care for all elderly and disabled people in England, the annual cost of building 100,000 new social homes, the annual cost of eradicating child poverty in the UK. A 2% tax on the super-rich would not only generate revenue for the public good, but also reduce the concentration of wealth and power in the hands of a few. It would make the UK a more fair and democratic society, where everyone has a chance to thrive and contribute. What do you think? Do you support a 2% tax on the super-rich? Let us know in the comments below. One of the most pressing issues facing the UK today is the lack of affordable housing. Millions of people are struggling to pay their rent or mortgage, and many more are living in overcrowded or unsuitable conditions. The government has repeatedly failed to meet its targets for building new homes, especially those that are genuinely affordable for low and middle-income households. But what if there was a way to fund the construction of 145,000 new affordable homes a year, without increasing the public debt or cutting spending on other vital services? That's what a group of fair taxation campaigners have proposed, by introducing a modest wealth tax on the richest 350 families in the UK. According to their analysis, a 2% tax on assets above £10 million held by all members of the Sunday Times Rich List could raise as much as £22 billion a year. That's more than enough to cover the cost of building 145,000 new affordable homes a year, which they estimate at £16.5 billion. How did they arrive at these figures? Well, based on the average building cost per square metre in the UK, which is between £1,775 and £3,000, they calculated that a typical two-bedroom house would cost around £226,812 to build. Assuming that 80% of the new homes would be two-bedroom houses and 20% would be three-bedroom houses, which would cost around £286,500 each, they multiplied these costs by the number of homes needed to reach 145. Of course, these are only rough estimates, and the actual costs may vary depending on the location, design, and quality of the new homes. But even if we assume a higher average cost per square metre of £3,500, the total cost of building 145,000 new affordable homes a year would still be less than £20 billion. So where would this money come from? The campaigners suggest that it could be raised by taxing the wealth of the richest 350 families in the UK, who collectively own £748 billion worth of assets. A 2% tax on assets above £10 million would mean that only those with extreme wealth would pay anything at all. For example, someone with £11 million in assets would pay £20,000 a year in wealth tax, while someone with £100 million in assets would pay £1.8 million a year. The campaigners argue that this would be a fair and progressive way to share the wealth that we all create, and to reduce the inequality that has grown over the years. They point out that similar wealth taxes exist in Norway, Spain and Switzerland, and have helped to fund public services and ease the cost of living crisis for some of the poorest people in those countries. They also claim that this wealth tax would not discourage investment or innovation, as some critics might suggest. On the contrary, they say that it would encourage the wealthy to use their money more productively and responsibly, rather than hoarding it or hiding it offshore. They also note that many of the wealthiest people in the UK are paying a relatively low tax rate compared to those who earn their income from work. The campaigners call on the government to carry out urgent reform of the tax system, which they say is fundamentally unfair and outdated. They say that income from work should not be taxed more than income from investments, rent and inheritances. They also say that more resources should be invested in hospitals, schools and parks, rather than subsidizing landlords and property speculators. By introducing a 2% wealth tax on the UK's wealthiest families, they say that we could fund public services and offset inequality. And one of the most important benefits of this policy would be to build 145,000 new affordable homes a year, enough to house nearly 500,000 people and make a significant dent in the housing crisis.